there's a couple of ways to think about trends. One is trends that are accelerating, intensifying, getting stronger. Another are those trends that are holding steady, not kind of increasing or decreasing, but maintaining their pace. And then finally, there are those trends that are declining and we're seeing dissipate. So I was looking back over the last year and thinking about kind of in the platform space, what have we been seeing? And I'd like to highlight a couple of trends that are actually accelerating. And there's three that I would like to highlight. One is growth of super apps. We're seeing that accelerate. The second are platform to platform integrations. These are not exactly mergers and acquisitions, but rather two platforms coming together and finding business reasons to do deals and tap into their networks, often very extensive networks with millions of customers that benefit from those integrations. And then finally, regulation. We're seeing growing trend and accelerating trend towards regulating big tech, typically big platforms. So I'll hit those. So let me start with the super apps. When digitization became sort of a thing, I would say almost 10 years ago, it was really around this idea of disruption and unbundling. But now we're beginning to see that digitization also includes rebundling. And that's where we bring in the super app idea, which is rather than develop a platform around a single purpose like ride sharing or payments or finding a restaurant or hooking up and identifying airlines or hotels. Those were kind of dedicated apps. We're now seeing companies combine these into a single platform in which all of these services are combined. So we're seeing a rebundling in this space. And a good example is actually outside of the United States in Southeast Asia. There's a company called Grab. It started out as a taxi ride-hailing company, and it has grown substantially over the last 7 years. It now includes payments through wallets. It's got games. It's got food recommendations. It's got a scooter service that you can tap into, news, groceries, a whole plethora of activities that you can get through one app, right, that connects you to all these various services. And Grab just recently was in the news this month. On December 2nd, they did one of these SPACs in which they merged with another company called Altimer and listed on the NASDAQ. So we're seeing these super apps not just be kind of a novel, kind of private enterprise that, lives in the startup world, but now we're seeing them become fairly substantial. This company now has a market cap of $33 billion, and it is the largest company listed from Southeast Asia on an American exchange. So it gives you a sense of the size and scale. And we're seeing other companies now perk up and pay attention to this. PayPal has announced that it is moving to a kind of super app strategy and blending kind of its core of payments with other integrations to e-commerce, combining bill pay, and even offering customers access to cryptocurrencies. Square also has announced that it's rebranding as a company called Block, and it's bringing together, and we can see the beginnings of a super app strategy is there. So I think this trend towards super apps has been happening for a number of years now, but we really saw it intensify and consolidate this past year. So another trend that is accelerating are platform to platform integrations. And these go beyond the M&A. And there have been quite a number of M&A deals in the platform space this past year. For example, Fiverr, which is the well-known gig economy platform, which is very large now and is benefited tremendously from the COVID environment and just the general trend towards recognizing the value proposition of reaching independent workers through digital transactions. They just did a deal with a company called Stoke Talent for $95 million. Then you had Intuit, the tax company, bought MailChimp for $12 billion. So that was another platform-to-platform acquisition. And then you had other companies in the e-commerce space like Etsy purchased Depop, which is a fashion app, for $1.6 billion. So that's kind of a standard way of thinking about how companies get together to grow and build scale. But as I mentioned, we're now seeing more and more platform-to-platform integrations where they don't do an actual merger, but they see tremendous value in linking their businesses. And I'll give you an example. which is Spotify has just done an integration with Shopify. This now allows an artist to not only have their page on Spotify to show kind of what their mixes are and their releases and even their touring schedule you can find, but they also now, through this integration with Shopify, offer opportunities for the artist to sell their merchandise right through Spotify. So that's an interesting integration that's taking place. And Shopify is extremely large and can process those payments all over the world. And Spotify now has, probably, I don't know what it is now, probably over 60 countries around the world. So that's a really big one. Another one that's interesting is a retail company or e-commerce company in Brazil called Magalu. It's a $30 billion company and has a very strong position in the e-commerce space in Brazil. It's done an interesting integration with Deezer, which is a streaming service that's called Shopping Inside Songs. So you play a song, and while you play that song, it'll actually show you the instruments that were involved in creating that song. And so that provides an opportunity for people to discover instruments and where you can buy them. And so this has apparently accelerated the sales of their instrument portfolio by 80%. So it's a pretty cool opportunity. And we see more and more of innovation taking place in e-commerce, moving away from these traditional e-commerce web pages to offering experiences. And by bringing these platforms together, they can accelerate and expand the experiences that can be offered through these integrations. Let me turn also to regulation because 10 years ago, these platform companies were relatively small, but also were under the radar and not that big. But now they've become some of the biggest ones, are now trillion-dollar companies and have become deeply integrated in not just our personal lives and how we do business, but in economies. And so this has raised some concerns both on the competitive front. So there's a lot more activity and attention to anti-competitive behavior of large platforms. And so there have been actions taken both in the United States, Asia, and in Europe against the big platforms to ensure competitive playing field. We're also seeing consumer protection concerns rising. So things like ad targeting have gotten a lot more attention, and there are a growing amount of regulations and policy discussion around how to stop these very aggressive, particularly personalization. So third-party cookies that permit tracking online, these kinds of activities, which were hailed as an innovation a number of years ago to allow that kind of personalization, but now are considered both an intrusion and potentially an anti-competitive actions. And so the regulators are now paying a lot more attention to these issues and putting in place regulations to constrain them. So those three trends, I think, are really reshaping the platform space and making for something that needs to be watched by all companies, either the platforms as well as the companies that rely on those platforms for business, because it shapes the kinds of opportunities and risks that each one of them face, not only this past year, but going into the next year. And we see these trends continue to accelerate.